Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be getting into episodes 734 through 736, which will cover manga chapter 791 through 793. And the battle for Dressrosa has finally completed, and we got several amazing episodes to talk about, especially due to Fujitora's bold actions in these episodes. Alright, so synopsis. The battle and the tyrannical reign of Doflamingo over Dressrosa has finally come to an end, but how will the people of Dressrosa and the rest of the world react to such a world-shattering piece of news after Admiral Fujitora works to make sure that the world learns the real truth of what happened before the world government can cover it up? Alright, so differences. There are actually very few major differences. Most of it just comes again at elongating certain scenes or adding in reaction shots from people that weren't in the manga. But yeah, the only two changes that I really noticed were there's a filler scene of Vice Admiral Maynard preparing for his announcement to the nearby islands in accordance to Isho's orders. And in the manga, it just immediately cuts to Maynard making the announcement after they chain up Doflamingo. The second change that I could see was there's a filler scene of the Straw Hats regrouping on a sleeping Luffy and Law, being looked after by Viola and Rebecca. This short scene is anime filler, but I do like the little touch of Law smiling at all of them celebrating their victory. It kind of shows that Law has really warmed up to them and isn't really just using them. He's almost kind of become friends with them, which I really love seeing. And in the manga though, after Riku and Isho's sort of scene, it goes straight to Kuro saluting and thanking the Tontara, so this kind of just wedges in between both of those scenes. But other than that, I don't really see too many other major changes. Which is good because the source material for these episodes is amazing. I mean, I absolutely love these chapters and these episodes. So let's get into them. And yeah, like I said, as amazing as the build-up and climax to the end of the battle is, of course, the reactions, fallout, and the emotions from this intense and drawn-out battle has been just as, if not even more emotionally rewarding. And as much as it is a source of criticism of this arc, the long drawn-out pacing and the very long ramp-up to everything makes seeing just how meaningful and powerful an event this is for everyone. And starting with Rebecca and Viola, as they see Luffy being helped down by Law, who coolly shambles him back down onto the rooftop that they're all on. And one thing still remains, though, is the birdcage going to disappear? And everyone is looking to Gats to tell them what the result is of the fight. And I love that he's the one to tell them to look up and inform everyone that they're free. And I also love how Oda got me caring and invested in the freaking commentator of the Colosseum by the end of this arc. I am fully invested in this guy. And Oda has sprinkled in all these little moments showing his character and what kind of a person he is. And he could have easily been a forgotten character that was just there to provide hype and commentation to the games. But throughout, Oda made sure to flesh this guy out by showing that he's not only passionate about his job, but cares for Dressrosa, and that he wasn't a Don Quixote lackey. He did what he could within his power to give commentary during the games, and didn't just keep piling on Rebecca like everyone else seemed to be doing. In particular, once the fight began, he stepped in to help Luffy out, even though it could cost him his life. And then what he goes on to do to save Rebecca and Viola was absolutely amazing. And once again, in this scene, the way he says, what kind of commentator fails to crown a victor as he gets back up after having his chest stabbed by Doflamingo to announce the winner as Luffy and reassure everyone that the birdcage is gone and that they're all finally free. Everyone is looking to him to let them know whether this nightmare is actually over or not. And the way he takes his responsibility so seriously, quite literally, moves me. As ridiculous as it sounds, I honestly get choked up every time he has to get up and say all of this, especially when he gets to the point of actually announcing Lucy, aka Luffy, as the winner. He himself has broken down and is so overcome with emotion that he can't even speak clearly anymore. And it's such an amazing scene because while everyone else who hasn't suffered as much is just frustratingly yelling at him to pull it together, but Riku and Rebecca hearing him break down with him as well because they know what this actually means. It's such an amazing moment. And Guts is a great example of how Oda cares for all his characters, not just just random characters who are expendable. He puts the time and effort into expanding on even these like more minor characters, which is so amazing. Also, during this scene, the anime does a really nice touch where they cut to the citizens of Dressrosa, where the shadows of the birdcage projected onto them slowly disappear, visually showing them that they're all finally being freed from their personal and metaphorical prisons from Doflamingo. And I thought that was a really nice touch from Toei in terms of visual storytelling that just isn't possible for Oda to do in the manga, even if he wanted to do something like that. And yeah, I think that's a perfect representation, and it's beautifully done in the anime. So kudos to the director of this episode. I also love that visual of everyone pushing so hard against the birdcage that when it does disappear, everyone just falls over from the force except for Fujitora, which you can take in one of two ways, I guess. A, he wasn't trying all that hard to push it so as to like keep his sort of neutrality, I suppose. Or that Oda wrote him in a way to keep his regal image as an admiral, to not have him stumble over like everyone else, to preserve his sort of aura, as it will. I choose to think it was the latter. Also, if you want to, in an in-world explanation, I think with Fujitora's incredible observation haki, he already knew Doflamingo was done and that the birdcage was disappearing, so he kind of let his strength go by the time it came down. So I like to think that he was actually trying to keep the birdcage from closing in, and that he was putting a lot of force into it, but he was just so observant that he could tell that the birdcage was coming down, and so he knew not to keep pushing hard. And this is actually one of the few times where cutting to every single character's reaction is not only canon, but also actually necessary and worth it. This is a moment where it does actually tell a story, seeing how this affected everyone differently, but also how it affected specific people, because some have suffered and sacrificed far more because of Doflamingo's reign compared to others. And so seeing the different levels of the fighters that came in and the gladiator warriors who were there just mainly to fight and to survive. And then you see like the Straw Hats, the royal family, the regular citizens. Like, it actually is important to see all these different reactions, because each one of them is a very personal experience to them, seeing this conflict finally come to an end. Because obviously, yeah, some people lived their lives and were fine with Doflamingo because they were never really harmed by him. He was just kind of a weird, experience. But then others, they lost time with their family members. They lost their livelihoods. They lost loved ones. They sacrificed so much fighting for it. So it's just like, yeah, just seeing all the different reactions, I think, was important. And this is one of the few times where, yeah, cutting to everyone's facial reactions is warranted. And to that end, I think the one that hits the hardest by far is Kuros, though. Oda has him coolly smiling and just walking away, thinking that he's just going to have a cool guy reaction to something he's been fighting so hard for, to keep up his strong warrior aura. But then it cuts to him walking away from everyone else and in the rubble. And once he's hidden away from everyone, he breaks down harder than anyone. And you know what? I don't think any less of him. I mean, it's not like I don't think anyone would have. You love this guy even more. This is a man that has lost so much at the hands of Doflamingo. His home, his family, his life, all in the cruelest ways imaginable. He lost the love of his life, Scarlet. But not only that, she died not even knowing who he was. His daughter was constantly put in danger, but most devastatingly, he lost time with her. Even though he was right there, he's been silently fighting for 10 years, most of it by himself. There's probably no one on that island that has been fighting as hard as Kuros has, and for so long, and seeing it all just pour out from a man that has shown nothing but strength and fortitude is absolutely amazing. But also heart-wrenching and heartwarming, all at the same time. And the performance here by Rikiya Koyama is incredible. Like, just his screams of pain, but also of relief, and just that release is so incredible. I don't know how else to describe it. The next scene in the following episode sees us circling back to Sabo and Burgess, who unfortunately we didn't really get to see what this fight was like, but based on how it ended, it seems like Burgess didn't really stand much of a chance at all against Sabo, especially now that he has the Meta Meta fruit. But that kind of shocked me that Burgess is part of an Emperor's crew and gets handedly beat by what is essentially an Ace clone in terms of power and skill, I suppose. Although I guess Sabo was much more capable and a trained fighter in terms of skill, owing to the fact that Sabo was a much more capable and trained hand-to-hand fighter since he grew up not relying on the meta powers, whereas Ace, like Blackbeard mentioned during their duel on Banaro Island, that Ace had grown too reliant on his powers, while Sabo is an incredibly capable hand-to-hand combatant, now with a Logia fruit on top of that. So I guess, yeah, Sabo is a little bit stronger in terms of just overall fighting prowess. Burgess, knowing he can't beat Sabo, stoops to an underhanded method by trying to rile up Sabo with Ace's death. But unlike Ace and Luffy, Sabo, as we saw as a kid, was always the most level-headed of the trio and doesn't fall for it and just blasts Burgess with a Hiken or a Fire Fist, seemingly killing Burgess, but again, we cannot take any death seriously until we see a body and a character acknowledge it. But yeah, I do like that Sabo doesn't fall for this. And Burgess, for his part, was actually trying to rile him up to get him to lower his guard to try and kill him by stabbing him, which is, again, a really weird strategy against someone he knows has a Logia fruit. So, I mean, unless he... And it doesn't really seem like Burgess has Haki. Like, I don't know why he was so useless against Sabo if he had Haki, or was he just trying to hide that he had it just so he can get to this moment of trying to kind of swindle Sabo out of his fruit? It's a really weird... I don't know. I think this scene is kind of not that well written on Oda's part because there's just a lot of weird things that don't really make sense. And one other thing I also do like about this moment, though, is that Sabo, similar to Luffy and Shanks, was just ready to let it go and pretty much held no real grudge until he started bad-mouthing Ace. Because as we know, both Luffy and Shanks basically will do nothing. If you insult them, they're not going to really react to it too much. But once you start messing with their friends and family, oh man, hell is going to rain down on you, and Sabo lets Burgess have it. The Marines then descend on the executives and Doflamingo to arrest them all. And again, here we see Oda calling back to Arabasta as the pose that Doflamingo is defeated in, and him on the ground all sprawled out like that, is the exact same way Crocodile was found after he was defeated and arrested by the Marines. And while it's a little different in the manga, the anime actually goes to make sure that the two scenes are kind of similar, where you see Tashigi standing over Crocodile in the same camera angle as the Marines surrounding Doflamingo. And so, yeah, it's a nice little continuity in the anime as well. But going back to the executives, I am a little conflicted with the fact that Baby 5 kind of gets off scot-free without having to face any real consequences for her actions. Like, I get that she turned on the Don Quixote pirates and helped for much of the conflict, and that should definitely be recognized and rewarded, but at the same time, it doesn't wash away all the other horrible things she's probably done in the past, even if she was manipulated and taken advantage of from a very young age. And I know Oda has gone to great lengths to show, or to not show Baby 5 do anything all that bad. Because most of the time when you see Baby 5, she's either a kid just kind of hanging out and you don't really actually see her doing much. Or even when she does, she's not actually like hurting anyone really that badly. But yeah, you could go either way with this, but unfortunately, this is one character that I wish Oda had more time to explore to really make this moment sit better with me. But right now, as it stands, like, Baby 5 is just kind of, there's not really much more story to her other than outside of the cover stories. And so, yeah, I'm always a little conflicted with Baby 5 and sort of not the fact that she doesn't really experience too many consequences for her, poor actions. Another thing that I had not touched upon yet is the image of Doflamingo having finally lost his sunglasses. But even still, Oda takes care not to actually reveal his eyes. And I've commented on Oda's decision to never reveal Doflamingo's eyes before, but it's an interesting fact that even after his defeat, he is still kind of clinging to that. And I often wondered why Oda would go this far to obscure his eyes. And there's a part of me that thinks he's doing this out of pure amusement and there's no real bigger thematic reason. But then I also think something like, something like this probably isn't just for a gag. And I still have yet to figure out what Oda is trying to tell us, other than to really remove sort of the humanity from a character that is as despicable as Doflamingo, and that even in a vulnerable state like this, Oda doesn't want to give even an ounce of humanity to Doflamingo by emphasizing that he's not willing to show us his eyes, even when the glasses have fallen off. But it is a pretty powerful statement, though, with his glasses kind of falling off, because Oda does make sure to show us the sunglasses several times on the ground, as well as when he got knocked out by Luffy, you saw a single panel of the sunglasses flying through the air off of his face. And so this is something that Oda keeps emphasizing to us, that it is important that his glasses have finally come off, but he still won't show us his eyes. Now from here, something very curious begins to happen, as the Marine soldiers mention that Isho has ordered them not to report this incident to Marine HQ yet, and instead, Vice Admiral Maynard has been told to transmit a message to as many people as possible within the range of the Dendenmushis. And in this case, it's the 3 neighboring islands, which is the max range of those video Dendenmushis that they have, about what happened to Dressrosa. And at first I was wondering what this was, and as soon as Maynard started to speak, it became glaringly clear what was going on. Isho was trying to prevent what happened at Arabasta with Smoker from happening by getting in front of all of this. He prevented the report from HQ to go out, and before the world government has a chance to cover it up, he just put on blast publicly the real truth of what happened at Dressrosa, and that it was perpetrated by Shichibukai. Leading to the big moment of this episode, and one of the bigger moments of the arc, where we see the citizens pleading with Riku to resume his position as the king of Dressrosa, wishing for a pacifist king once again. But Riku feels that he doesn't deserve to be king again after what he perceives as a failure for letting Dressrosa fall to Doflamingo in the first place, which was not even his fault. And Elisabello comes to reaffirm that with Riku, that he should resume the throne, but the most surprising endorsement comes from none other than Admiral Fujitora, or Isho himself. He almost feels that Riku should return as king, but he takes it one step further, saying that he should not shoulder the blame for Doflamingo taking over Dressrosa, because in his mind, as he's about to say, this blame lies with the world government and the Marines for letting Doflamingo do this, for allowing the Shichibukai system to even exist. And that's his main point. And this is probably one of the most significant moments for a Marine. Isho not only acknowledges that the world government had much of the blame in allowing a Shichibukai pirate to do as he pleases, to the point where something like this could even happen. Then he would go on to apologize on behalf of the Marines to King Riku, but not just any apology. He and his entire battalion of troops all get on their knees and perform a dogeza, which is the most humble form of apology in Japanese culture. And as we've discussed in many past episodes, bowing is a very important aspect of Japanese culture, and the lower you bow your head signifies how much respect or regret you're showing to a person, and a dogeza is the lowest you can go, as you are basically putting your head on the ground. Typically, though, people who hold positions with a great deal of power or respect do not, under any circumstances, dogeza, because that would signify that they are now below the people they are apologizing to, and it can be seen as very humiliating. And so many people, of power or respect do not do a dogeza, even if they are very sorry. And only in extreme cases would you ever do that. And this is Isho kind of trying to hammer home that point, that a Marine Admiral is performing a dogeza. So the fact that a Marine Admiral is doing this and having all his men follow shows just how sorry and full of regret that Isho is, and to really hammer home the point for his own agenda. And this is why everyone is so uncomfortable seeing this, because you just don't see someone of this caliber performing a dogeza. And Isho here is incredibly shrewd. And I do think he is absolutely sincere about his apology and the failings on the Marines' part, but he also does have his own agenda for doing this. Being a Marine Admiral, he is privy to a great deal of information that's not made public, And we've already seen he knows the truth about Arabasta, and we'll further see in another flashback too. He actually hears it directly from Smoker, and how all of that stuff at Arabasta was a cover-up despite Smoker's protest. And he is determined to not let the same thing happen again by getting out in front of this, by having this broadcast to as many people as possible, and to relay the truth in its entirety before the world government has a chance to alter the narrative. Because, first of all, he's a good and honest person and wants to do the right thing, but also this is all part of his desire to discredit and get rid of the Shichibukai system. And I freaking love Isho. He is easily one of my favorite characters, and this isn't even his best moment in this arc. He still has one of my all-time favorite moments coming up in several episodes, and even in this set of episodes too. But of course, we now have to see what the response is from the Marines and the world government as we travel to Marijua, where Sakazuki is surprisingly berating the Gorosei. This dude, for as shitty of a human being he is, has some serious balls to just yell at and scold the 5 most powerful people on the planet. Like, these guys are celestial dragons, as well as the fact that they are the 5 most significant celestial dragons at that. So for a mere human to just yell and berate them is quite the sight to behold, and Sakazuki is holding his own despite them warning him not to overstep his status, but Sakazuki does not care. He has a life mission to execute his absolute justice, and no one, not even the Gorosei, will get in the way of that. And for that, he kind of has some of my respect. But this whole thing with Doflamingo, it turns out, he's been left completely in the dark, and his day is about to get even worse, as all of them are about to receive the news of Doflamingo's defeat at the hands of Luffy and Law, as well as Fujitora's actions. But before we move on from this scene, there's one other very significant piece of news we get in this that's kind of just tossed in there nonchalantly, as we finally know what former Admiral Aokiji, or Kuzan, has been up to since leaving the Marines. He has shockingly joined the Blackbeard Pirates. Like, what? And why? This fact is just like casually dropped in the middle of this conversation about something else and not even really focused on, but this is huge. Now we know why Smoker, when he spoke to him with a bit of apprehension when he was saved on Punk Hazard, because he was probably aware of that info, or at least heard rumors, and that's why Kuzan reassured him that he was still him, which I'm assuming meant that despite now aligning with a pirate, and not just any pirate, but one of the worst in the world, that he is still a good man, that he is who he is, and the man that Smoker believes him to be. This, though, begs the question, what is Kuzan actually doing with Blackbeard? And unfortunately, at this point, we just don't have enough information to really dive that much deeper into this, but this is definitely a massive piece of news that Blackbeard not only is going around collecting devil fruits, but he's now got one of the most powerful people in his crew, which, I mean, was already filled with crazy people, but having Kuzan is insane. Not long after the entire world will learn of this news, they will now have to reckon with the fallout of all of Doflamingo's dealings just disappearing. First, with all the warring kingdoms having to end their wars without their supply of weapons, which is a good thing, as well as the criminal and pirate underworlds now losing their supply of weapons and Smile devil fruits. At the same time, we get an update on the other Worst Generation members, which is far more interesting, and their reactions to their fellow classmates Luffy and Law's exploits. First, we get to see Bonnie as she's just seeing the news, but the reason why I wanted to mention this, because otherwise there's really nothing to mention here, is how the pizza vendor unable to figure out that there's something fishy going on when there's a person who's dressed exactly the same eating your pizza, walking past you, that looked very similar to the old lady, quote unquote, that was walking past you, but it's now just a kid. I just think that's really bad deductive skills. But also, I guess this scene serves as a way to show that Bonnie somehow escaped the world government. So last we saw, she was captured by Blackbeard, but then they had to get up and run because Sakazuki showed up. And so she was captured by Sakazuki. But now we see that she somehow made it out and is on her own again, which is a good thing, you know. It's definitely better than being captured by the Marines. But after that, we get an appearance from quite possibly the most neglected member of the Worst Generation, Uruj. This guy is probably the least amount of screen time for like a major named character, but this is certainly an interesting scene as he's resting on a nondescript sky island after he and his crew have somehow sustained some pretty massive injuries when all of a sudden some mysterious and frankly intimidating giant-like silhouette is lumbering towards them. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, this silhouette is only actually seen in the anime. In the manga, we don't actually get to even see the silhouette of whoever this person is because it hadn't been revealed. But by the time this episode was animated, it would have already been revealed in the manga long before, so they decided to add this in. And since manga readers will immediately recognize who the silhouette is, the build-up for the hype for their eventual reveal in a few more episodes was kind of started here. And to my knowledge, we still haven't figured out or learned how Uruji even sustained these injuries or what happened to him, in that. But the next character we learn about is Bej. And he is yet another surprise as he's seen aboard a Big Mom pirate ship, which means he's joined her as one of her subordinates, most likely. And he states that he is after Caesar, which means that the Big Mom ship that was after the Sunny could potentially be the same one that they ran from. So potentially it was Bej that was actually part of that sort of crew who was trying to capture the Thousand Sunny and who eventually started chasing like Sanji and Nami and Momo and Brook and all of them. Next, it looks like the negotiations between Apu, Hawkins, and Kid have finally settled down and they've seemingly come to an agreement on their alliance. And while Luffy and Law are going after Kaido after this alliance has set their sights on another emperor, Shanks. And I always felt like they targeted Shanks here because he's seemingly the least threatening of the four emperors. At least that's my own headcanon. And I remember seeing so many theories pop up at the time that this was a setup for a potential battle between the Law and Luffy alliance versus the Kid, Hawkins, and Apu alliance, which I had a hard time believing since logistically speaking, like that would mean that Luffy would meet Shanks way before it seems like it should be appropriate. So I just never really bought into that. And I also just don't know why wouldn't Shanks be able to protect himself? Like he's an emperor. He could probably wipe the floor with these guys right now. Lastly, we see Drake learning the news of Doflamingo's defeat and acknowledging his father's killer's downfall, but doesn't seem to really care for his dad all that much. But the main reveal of this scene is that Drake has seemingly aligned himself with Kaido, as he and his men are searching for a lost Kaido, and you can tell that he is working for him and not just searching for him because one of the men yells out, Kaido-sama, using that honorific means sort of a sign of respect that usually wouldn't use unless you are on friendly or familiar terms. And I use the term friendly very loosely here, as most likely they're subordinates. So yeah, it's very interesting because the update to the Worst Generation members, that means that the majority of the Worst Generation has either aligned themselves with an emperor or are going after an emperor, or in Blackbeard's case, is an emperor. It's pretty exciting as the post-time skip era of One Piece has really begun to launch sort of the emperors as the main threats of the series, moving on from the Shichibukai of the pre-time skip era. And yeah, of course, the emperors are much more intimidating in terms of both their designs and just sort of their aura. Again, I keep using that word in this episode, but yeah, that's very applicable here. In between all of this, we get a really touching scene that I really liked of Kuros saluting and thanking the Tontara as they've managed to succeed in all of their objectives. And I always tear up during this moment because not just because it's a beautiful moment, but because Oda did such an amazing job instilling in us just how uphill of a battle this was and how much both Kuros and the Tontara had been suffering for so long. The length and the pacing of the Dressrosa arc is often criticized, and rightfully so, but the length really does lend itself to moments like these because it just wouldn't hit as hard if we didn't understand just how difficult of a struggle this has been for all of them. And by this point, the struggle of getting through Dressrosa, you as a reader or a watcher, you kind of feel their struggles too. And so moments like this hit that much harder. And I love that the myth of the fairies from the very beginning of the arc comes back full circle, as Kuros mentions that they've been watching over and protecting the island, but now they will need their help once again to rebuild Dressrosa. And it's honestly a very beautiful and poetic moment with the people who have been fighting for the longest for this finally get to sort of share in that, in their dream of rebuilding Dressrosa. Now, flashing back to the final scene, This is probably my favorite moment in this set of episodes, and maybe one of the more better moments in the arc. We get yet another incredible moment with Isho as he is getting reamed by Sakazuki about not reporting back to HQ and letting the truth get out like that. Like every Isho scene, this is another amazing one where not only does he take it, he argues back and drops one of the coldest and probably one of the most real lines in the series when Sakazuki screams at him, "It's a matter of credibility and dignity for the Marine headquarters. Your selfish actions dishonored the face of justice." And Isho comes right back at him with a line so true that it has resonated with me ever since I read it. He yells back steadfastly, "If we lose credibility just by admitting fault, we didn't have any in the first place," which is so damn true that even Sakazuki has no response to that because in his heart of hearts, he knows that he's right. If your sense of justice has been built on nothing but lies, fear, and intimidation to the point where in the eyes of the public, they have no room to give you the benefit of the doubt when you mess up, then you've clearly done something wrong. And that's not credibility, that's just oppression. And I love this line so much because it applies to so many different situations from our own national governments in real life to our personal relationships and everything else in between. If you've lived your life or operated your organization in such a way that you've only been able to maintain a good perception of it through less than honorable ways, people will see through that eventually, and one mistake will confirm their worst suspicions of you rather than people giving you the benefit of the doubt. And so this is a perfect example of that. If your sense of justice is so fragile that one mistake will basically ruin it, then you've not held up any sense of justice or credibility whatsoever. And the best thing Sakazuki could do was change the subject, which is hilarious, by ordering Isho to do something to make it up to them by capturing Luffy and Law, or else no dinner, aka he can't go back to the Marine base. And during this scene, we also see that the reason this moment reminds us so much of Smoker and Crocodile is because it was a direct response to that, as Smoker had told Isho personally about his frustrations with the Shibukai system and the cover-up that happened at Arabasta. It also became clear to me that Isho didn't really have an ill will towards the Straw Hats, and why he had so much faith in them to gamble the fate of an entire country was because of the fact that Smoker had mentioned that it was because of them that Arabasta was saved, and he had faith that they could do it again, which I think is incredible. I mean, I don't think it's outright stated, but that's just how I've always read this moment. We then also flash back to the present, where Smoker is still recovering from his injuries sustained on Punk Hazard, as he and Tashigi read the news of Doflamingo's defeat and Isho being able to get the news out unaltered. And you could tell this has weighed heavy in their hearts this entire time, and it's great to see them get some closure on what happened at Arabasta thanks to Isho, because as you remember, both of them were incredibly pissed, particularly Tashigi, but also Smoker, to the point where he was able to tell them, go eat shit to them. So it was really nice to see them finally get some closure to that moment in their lives. But also one translator's note here about the gag of Tashigi misinterpreting what Smoker says for him being hungry. This is a difficult one to translate, as it's a wordplay on a common Japanese way of saying that you are hungry, which is onaka ga suita. Onaka being stomach and suita meaning empty or emptying. And what Smoker says after mentioning that he couldn't pull that off even if he had Isho status, he says mune ga suita, literally meaning my chest is empty. But metaphorically he's saying like my heart or soul has gotten lighter, as in this has been weighing on his chest and it has finally been lifted by Isho doing this for them. And it's very similar to sort of in English when someone says a weight has been lifted off your shoulders and you feel lighter as a result of it. Obviously you could mean that literally, but metaphorically speaking, like there has been something in your mind or in your heart that's been weighing on you, and having someone do something for it or you doing something for it, you finally sort of lift that metaphorical weight off of your shoulders. This is very similar to that. So when Smoker says mune ga suita and Tashigi hears that and she thinks he says onaka ga suita or I'm hungry, so that's why she starts offering him food and not really understanding what Smoker was actually saying. And then lastly, in this scene, we also get a nice update on the kids from Punk Hazard as well. They seem to be doing much better and are on their way to see Vegapunk, who they hope can reverse the effects of Caesar's terrible experiments. So hopefully we'll see a little bit more about that as well. But all in all, this was an amazing set of episodes that brings the emotion with the end of such a grueling fight and arc, along with some world-shattering reveals. But with Fujitora now tasked with capturing Luffy and Law, it will be interesting to see how he navigates this, because I find it hard to believe that Isho will actually attack Luffy. But that's where we'll end it there. And if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. It really helps. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, also please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram at SunnyGoPodcast for when I post updates when I have time of new episodes, or to see pictures of my manga collection. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. Just a small spoiler section, but if you're not interested in that, stay safe out there and hope to see you on the next episode. Bye! Alright, so just two minor things I wanted to talk about in the spoiler section. And the first is the silhouette. Obviously, we now know that it's Kaido. But it is interesting why the anime decided to show that. I mean, I think it's more so to hype up the manga readers, because they would obviously know it. But yeah, in the manga originally, you only see his men say that there's someone coming, and Uruj kind of looks over to his left, and you don't actually see what he's looking at or who they're even talking about. And yeah, obviously this sets up Kaido's reveal in about, I think it happens 3 chapters from now, or maybe 3 episodes or so, where we see Kaido is trying to essentially off himself by jumping off of a sky island, where he then somehow miraculously lands in front of Hawkins, Apu, and Kid. So like Uruj, Hawkins, Kid, and Apu were all kind of in the same vicinity, which is incredible to me, like the sort of the coincidences. But yeah, I found that really interesting. The other thing concerning Kid and that alliance is their original plan to take down Shanks. So I completely forgot about this, to be honest, when I was rereading Egghead and rewatching Egghead too, that this was Kid's original plan to go after Shanks. Now, we don't know why he wants to go after Shanks. I still don't really have any idea why he wanted to do that. But yeah, even after the whole, saga on Wano took place, he still made good on that. Even though his alliance was now gone, Kid still wanted to take down Shanks, and so he would eventually come face to face with Shanks and just attack him, and then immediately get erased by Shanks, because he's just way too freaking strong. Which, one of the better episodes and one of the cooler moments in the series, I think. But yeah, it is interesting that he's always had this sort of goal in mind to take down Shanks for whatever reason. I don't know why. Maybe because they're both red-haired pirates. He was getting jealous. I don't know. We just don't know enough about Kid to really understand that of why. But yeah, it's very interesting. Anyways, those are all really the only two things I wanted to mention. So thanks for listening, and hope to see you on the next episode. See ya.